Hello, and welcome to our discussion about plot lines. There are 5 parts to a plot line. The first is what we call the exposition. The exposition is the moment in the story where characters are introduced. We understand in the exposition who is in the story, where it's taking place, when it's taking place, and what is happening. The what can be a problem or event that is going to take place. Once the problem and event has been established, we move to the rising action or complications. In this part of the story, the problem or event become harder to solve or become complicated in some way. We begin to see the consequences of actions. These consequences of actions eventually lead us to the climax. The climax is the most intense part of the story. It is the tipping point, which is why you see it at the peak here, where the story is going to go in one direction or the other. The choices made in the climax result in the rest of your story. So whatever choice is made here, we see played out in the falling action, which leads us to our final area, which is the resolution. The resolution wraps up the problem or event that was occurring in the story. We're going to run through an example of plotline now. So we're going to start with our exposition and understand who's in the story. We're going to have George, Mike, and Sally. It's going to take place at school, probably in the hallways. They're going to be 7th graders. And the situation or problem is that George likes Sally. By itself, not a real problem. But now I have to get to my rising action or complications. And so the first complication in this event is that George is afraid to talk to Sally. This complication leads George to start brainstorming how he can solve the problem. His solution in this complication is to ask Mike, his best friend, to talk to Sally for him. That solution, though, has consequences. By asking Mike to talk to Sally, a new complication arises, and that is that Mike decides he likes Sally too. Obviously, this is going to put a strain on the two boys' friendship. And when George finds out, he's not very happy. This leads to a climactic moment in our story, where George and Mike get into an argument. They're arguing about their friendship. Now, in this climax, they have a choice. They can either end their friendship and try to fight over Sally, or they can reconcile with each other. I like happy stories. So in this particular story, in the climax, George and Mike decide to reconcile. That it's better to be friends than to fight over a girl that they haven't really talked to that much. And so in our falling action, we see Mike say go to bat for George about how great of a guy he is to Sally. Our resolution is that through all of this problems, George and Mike are now friends. The original problem that George likes Sally does get a resolution, because when Mike finally starts talking to Sally and George gets to get a good word in for himself, they find out something terrible. That Sally can't date. In our story, we had an exposition which gave us the who, the what, the when, and set our story up so a reader knows what's happening. Our rising action or complications are a series of events in which one event leads to another. Stories are about seeing the consequences of our actions. The falling action is the consequence of the largest action in the story, which is the climax. And the resolution follows from the falling action to wrap up the problem. So why does all this matter? Because we're going to be writing a story about either the Titanic or World War I. Here are some ideas that you can use in your plot line to create a story about the Titanic. Additionally, you can write a story about World War I. Here's some ideas that people have come up with for that story.